This panel is 4 of our alumni coming back and sort of sharing their reflections and their own doctoral journeys. And part of the reason we do it is we always love seeing sort of where people have gone. And it's also nice for us to have people who are closer to, finishing or in the doctoral process than we are as faculty. And so I'm not going to spend too much more time talking about it, but hand over to our 4 panelists online. Thank you guys very much for coming back and speaking to the group. And feel free to. So it's meant to be quite informal, free flowing. So after each of them sort of says their bit, feel free to just have an open-ended conversation about where things are going, any questions that you might have. It's meant to sort of, in some ways, be a bringing back of people who've been at the workshop before, and just meant to be quite informal. So hopefully it'll be fun and informational as well. Thanks.
Okay, so good evening all. My name is Sruthi Krishnan. I completed my PhD in June 2022 from National Institute of Technology, Calicut, Kerala. Presently, I am working as a postdoctoral research fellow at University College Dublin, Ireland. So today I would like to share some of my experiences throughout my PhD journey with more focus on the use and importance of interactive and collaborative research. So to start with, basically, I am an environmental engineer by master's degree. And as I was curious to explore the research possibilities in the environmental domain, I did my PhD in urban and environmental planning. So initially, there were so many gaps and so many hurdles to cross over because, as I mentioned, there was a transition from an engineering background to a planning background. So I soon after completing my courseworks, required courseworks, I had to, it was mandatory that I had to make my foundation very clear and very strong. Foundation in the sense, the research proposal which I had given at the time of PhD admission, I had to make it very strong. So I had done a very intensive literature review. I had referred so many good number of index journal papers, books, and educational NPTEL videos, and as well as the discussions with my research supervisor helped me to maintain or make that foundation very strong. So at that time, I was clear about what to do in my research or PhD thesis, and the outcome was also more or less clear. But later on, the next stage or the next doubt or the confusion, what you can call it, it was regarding how to do that work. What to do was clear, but how to do that was not clear. So again, I sat with all the literature works. I was back with all the journal papers, magazines, articles, etc. I spent a lot of time on that. But unfortunately, I could end up with only clearing about 20% of my doubts regarding how to approach my PhD work. The doubts were regarding which tools or techniques to be used, which statistical software or which analysis to be used. In my case, there was a study area that had to be fixed. So how to fix that? And after fixing that, which data to be collected, what data to be collected, from where it has to be collected. So many doubts were going through my mind. And the literature, with the help of literature, it didn't help me out. So I had a discussion with my research supervisor. He advised me to open up my research community or my research world. So he told me to interact with so many research people over wherever you meet. So at that time, I went to so many government and non-government organizations, academic institutions, industries, etc. And I had a couple of healthy discussions with the researchers, scientists, then the faculties, research colleagues, research scientists, etc. So many people I had healthy discussions, and all their suggestions and inputs had helped me a lot. And I had a couple of data with me, which are all the relevant data with me by the end of all the data collection stage. And then naturally, the next stage of doubt or confusion was regarding how the analysis had to be done, because all the data is with me, then how the analysis had to be proceeded or carried out. So I did a pilot study with that. It was not a very intensive work or anything. I did just a pilot study. And then I attended many national and international conferences. So during the conferences, I presented that small amount of work, that pilot study, I just presented there. And at the end of the conferences, as you all know, there will be question and answer sessions. So the experts or the resource persons who had come for the conferences, they asked me so many doubts. And at that time, I realized that the research problem which I was dealing with so many months or so many years, that can be thought in different angles as well. So that was a very fruitful thing which I did, because by attending the conferences, I was able to think in different angles as well. So after that, I had discussions with my supervisor and we were able to cope up with that as well. And then later on, I attended the PhD workshop at IIHS, that was in 2020 January. So as at that time, I was also a participant like you. And then we were informed that there will be one-on-one interaction with the faculties at IIHS. So before coming there, I had kept my notes of regarding the research queries, research questions, and everything which I had in my mind. And during the interactions, I made the opportunity to meet all the faculties there. I discussed the research problem with each and every one of them. And from their experience and from their knowledge, they shared all the suggestions and inputs. And very fortunately and very luckily, all those suggestions which later on, which I discussed with my supervisor, we were able to mold my PhD thesis into a new one, because we had a discussion with so many people, so many faculties over there, and from their inputs and their suggestions, we were able to mold and move forward the PhD work to a great extent. So that was very helpful. So I would like to suggest the PhD participants, I mean the participants for the workshop, whenever you get a chance to interact with people, just do that, because we don't know from where the clue or the hint for moving your PhD work forward, it will come. So make sure that you get the make maximum utilization of the opportunity where you can meet the experts, resource person, maybe your research colleagues as well. So you can get to know more about it and you can move your PhD work forward. Then another thing which I wanted to share with you was regarding the research collaboration. So during my research work, I had collaborated with with the faculties from my department as well as from interdisciplinary departments, both from my college as well as from abroad. And the outcome was that we were able to publish good number of book chapters that were published by Springer Publications. So that is also possible through research collaborations. So, and that is equally important as well. And one more thing, or the last thing which I would like to share with you, is that during my fourth year and fifth year, I had interactions with the master students in my department. So interactions in the sense, I took classes for them, classes starting from identifying good number of journals in from the online databases like Web of Science, Scopus, etc. Then use of Mendeley software, then how to approach a research paper, how to write a research paper, etc., how to read a research paper, etc. So the fruitful outcome of all those interactions were that we were able to bring up some amount of book chapters, and few papers are still in the, sorry. I'm extremely sorry. Okay, so a good number of journal communications are still in the pipeline for communication to good index journals. So that is also possible. So in that way, those master students were able to learn from my knowledge, and also I was able to grow myself. And I was able to take up a new role as a reviewer by reviewing their papers as well. So there are so many possibilities in a PhD journey. So make sure that you make maximum possible extent to the maximum possible extent. And I would like to end up my talk by saying that the PhD journey or the PhD outcome is a purely individual one, as you all know, but the PhD journey should be an interactive and a collaborative one. Thank you, and all the best to each and every one of you. Thank you so much.
Hi, am I audible? Yep.
Okay. So thanks, Shruti. I'm going to, if I can share my screen, I wanted to put down my thoughts a little bit on a PowerPoint, so I did that. Um, just see if I can do so. Right. Okay. So hopefully, I mean, this is not meant to be any kind of whatever. It's not really about me, but I'm just taking myself as a case study to kind of talk about how people in the built environment specifically sort of may have a journey, because especially because if one's goal is towards academia and you come from a built environment or kind of technical training background like architecture or something which is more profession oriented, it's usually a very complicated journey, because you kind of at some point have to decide to kind of steer away from practice, steer away from doing, public domain or any kind of consultancy work, and eventually decide to go towards academia. And mostly I'm going to try and talk about, for me, how that journey went. So I am Manas Murthy. I'm a fifth year PhD candidate at the University of Oregon. Still not finished it. Congratulations, Shruti. I'm still, I think, a year away, probably. And for me, it has been a very sort of circuitous journey from my undergraduate. So I think that's what I want to talk about, and really setting yourself up from a PhD into academia, if that's what you choose to do, or that's what I've chosen to do. So how I'm approaching all of this. So I did my bachelor's in architecture, did a master's in urban design, and then a master's in sustainable urbanism. Those things set me up to kind of do community engagement kind of work and start to become more and more uh, of a kind of niche expertise in sustainable mobility, specifically at the intersections of sort of planning, bureaucracy, governance, and working with communities. And so that was a bit of a kind of complex journey through my master's, through the kind of consultancy work I started doing, through the kind of experience I gained working with community engagement with the consultancy I was working at in the UK. And eventually I got to a point where I was working for a few years in Delhi, looking at sustainable mobility, also teaching. I give that as example to say that there are quite a few people I know in my own generation or people around me who have a similar kind of situation where they do a lot of visiting faculty roles. They continue to kind of work consultancy part-time or join an office, but at the same time continue to teach and gain some kind of research experience parallelly. And that's really the point I want to bring forward, is that choosing to do a PhD itself is somewhat driven by your ecology, where you are placed, what kind of work you're doing. So drawing from your own kind of professional ecology, from your professional experience, is a perfectly valid way to start your PhD journey. That's my point in sort of giving my own background. So because I was already doing a few projects on sustainable mobility, consulting with governments on project reports and things like that for smart cities, that kind of stuff. And I was already teaching at the same time. I started refining my own sort of research methodology, starting to understand what research is in the first place, even before I formally sort of thought about doing research. And with my community engagement background, I was able to interact a lot with people, specifically middle class in Delhi neighborhoods. And so that's already gave me a bit of an ethnographic background, that I was interviewing so many people on a day-to-day basis that I started to understand how just regular people operate in the city, or how they use cars or they don't, or what's their relationship to mobility? What's their relationship to governance? What's their relationship to urban local bodies, the bureaucracies that kind of drive urbanism? And so all of these things were sort of pre-decided for me a little bit through my professional journey. And at that point, I sort of decided to kind of take up a PhD because that seemed like the most logical thing to do. And also because, I mean, for me, the consultancy, culture in India was really kind of toxic. And I was at a point where I really did not want to work for government organizations anymore because it was it's a very draining process. And so I decided to channel these kind of quote unquote niche expertise into a kind of PhD, which can then be used to gain sort of formal foothold in academia. So it's a choice I made. It was I was very cognizant of the repercussions. I was also aware that when you embark on a PhD journey, it's extremely, I mean, I was earning significantly better when I was a consultant and a professional. And I knew that if I go into a PhD, it's going to be a tough time economically. So that's another thing, which is an important thing to think about when embarking on this journey, and to know that once you're getting into this and once you want to do this for, say, in order to get into academia, you're going to see a few years of poverty, really. And so knowing all of that, you kind of take that jump. I'm going to talk about another thing, and then I'll come back with questions which will tie these things together. So then I started my PhD, and then going through the PhD, you start to get really focused and inside your own head in terms of the PhD topic and the research question. And as Shruti said, it's a very collaborative process between your supervisor and other people you meet and conferences you attend. You start to really get more and more inside your niche research question. You're so focused on the project of the PhD that you start to lose sight of the career afterwards. And this is common, and I've gone through it myself. I've come back to a point, even before submitting at this point, where I'm still thinking about what will happen once I graduate. And that's where this thing about publications comes in. And so it's really about also constantly reminding yourself that this manuscript that you're producing is not the only thing that you're supposed to be doing during a PhD process. It's to know that by the time you come out of a PhD process, you should have some sense of what is your area of expertise, which should be broader than your research question. Everything is telling you to focus in on a very clear research question, but at the same time, the industry demands you to have a slightly broader area of expertise. So how do you build that up? Typically in academia, that's through proving your worth through publications. Currently, I have like 2 publications in the works, and then other areas that I'm like, okay, maybe I can expand into. And this is really the time once you're done coursework and you're in the process of writing or just about to write or nearing the end of your writing, where you really start to think about these things, about the future and about the career that you have lying ahead of you, or the lack of. So the reason I say all of this is because this is a major struggle. I mean, for myself, and I know for a lot of PhD students around me and PhD candidates who are nearing completion, that this becomes a big issue. How do you pitch yourself? Who are you? What worth do you have for academia? Kind of depends also on which country you're applying to, or whether you're thinking about teaching positions or you're thinking about postdoctoral positions. Of course, all of this depends on whether stuff is available, and the market is always bad for PhD students or PhD graduates. But having said that, you still have to kind of pitch yourself as somebody who's worth something. So publications, of course, are important. But then also because in my case, I'm writing something very ethnographic and almost anthropological. I also have to think about the balance between sort of focusing on journal articles or focusing on kind of producing this thing which can potentially turn into a book as a manuscript. So it's about thinking about that. It's about also about teaching experience. So in the people that I know around me, uh, the UK, for some reason, seems to have a better kind of, is more receptive to past teaching experience. And it's sort of slightly, I mean, it's just as much of a focus as publications might be. So which is, I think something to consider when you're on your PhD journey, or if you're thinking about sort of international market for academia. I also want to say all of this is with the caveat that I am somebody who's looking for academic positions not in the global south currently. Lots of my friends and colleagues are in the global south, or in India or places like that, who have a very different journey. But for me, I keep encountering this kind of issue of being someone who has gained a lot of their quote unquote experience in the global south, which often doesn't really count for much when it comes to looking for academic jobs, specifically academic jobs in the West or in the global north. So it is really something which one has to keep struggling with. And so it's hard. It's something for which you need to build networks. I've recently discovered that being on Twitter does matter. It's something that I really did not think about much, and I'm really not a very social media person. But for some bizarre reason, just calls, you get to hear about conference calls, positions, postdocs so much quicker and so much faster and so much immediately through your networks in Twitter, which is sort of something which, again, you are a global South scholar, you're trying to make it in the global North, you're going to have to face these kinds of things. But for me, I'm still, for example, very disappointed with how little my supervisor department university can do for me, really. So that's another thing to really consider about, to what extent can you leverage your institution, your specifically your supervisor and your sort of committee and or your department at in the larger market. Do they have cachet? Thinking about that even as you start your PhD journey is kind of important. And you can make them do stuff. So even if they're not currently doing, and even if they're not very well known, you can, you really need to push them. You need to push your supervisor to put you in touch with networks. You need to push your department to kind of reach out. You can set up, collaborations. You can set up exchanges for visiting PhD scholars. You can be the one to start it in your department, even if it doesn't happen right now. And so at the end of it, the point is it even worth it? So you really need to consider, because there is a possibility, and there are many people in areas of study, for example, migration scholars, who still have a better bet going into, let's say, consultancy after doing a PhD in migration, because academic jobs are always going to be worse paying. There are going to be fewer jobs academically. There's always a long, kind of race for tenure positions. So really, even after the PhD, it's not that you are only determined and you can only make it in academia at that point. You can still think about consultancies and things which are not academic, even after a PhD, even though the market seems to be much smaller for you. So yeah, I just wanted to bring these points out. And really, these questions are more for discussion. So I'm just going to end there.
Hi, sure. Can you hear me, Ekta?
Yeah.
Cool. Sorry. Thanks, Manas and Sruthi. That's really great. That's nice to see. Even for me, I was like, yeah, that's kind of interesting. I forgot to think about those things. Mine's a little bit more esoteric, so just bear with me. Oops, that's the wrong screen. There you go. Can you see a cartoon on your screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So this is how I ended up coping with my the personal dimensions, and that's what I want to talk a little bit about today, is just the kind of human part of doing a PhD, and then there's like a very specific focus on a tool that I just found amazing that I just wanted to share. But it's just the concept of the tool. So for me, I started this PhD journey, and just to confirm, sorry, my name is Jhono. I'm based at the University College London, but I'm from South Africa. So I've had this and I started a PhD program in South Africa that fell apart. And I ended up joining another program that was actually EU funded, but in London. So I had this sort of weird journey, but I think many people have had similar stops and starts. So I kind of started in 2018, and I made this sort of like, because my work is very much design based, it's architecture, but it's focused on creative techniques. So I ended up using this kind of cartooning technique to get through the lockdown and to reflect on it. So I created this sort of story that I called it the Doctoral Voyage. And I can share the link for this with the group after this. So don't worry if you can't read everything. But effectively, what I was sort of reflecting on was the fact that, you know, you're starting a PhD, and it's the first time you've had to make such a big decision about so many things with so much more behind you and so much slightly less in front of you. It's not that sort of, you know, undergrad is like, oh, it's fine, I'll just figure this out. Master's, okay, I can probably do this for a year. All of a sudden, you're 25, or my case 32, and you have to make a decision. That's like, oof, I'll be almost 40 when I'm done. That's quite a lot. And you have to like make it this amazing thing. And there's a lot of like uncertainty. So I have this sort of analogy of this bear that is lost in the woods and then ends up and the PhD is more like this journey on an ocean by yourself, trying to like create your craft as you go along. So I'll share these links at the end, but I document all of this stuff, and I agree with Manas, like having a Twitter presence, having a social media presence, it's very helpful because you can also connect, and the algorithm guides you towards often very interesting things. But for me personally, I documented my entire, well, I still am, I'm in my final year now, but I document the whole thing in quite a lot of detail. It's also a little bit of a nice thing that if you do end up documenting, whether it's Twitter or Instagram or I've got various platforms, is at some point you can look back and be like, oh, like I've actually done quite a lot of stuff. Because I think a lot of what I found of managing PhD is managing perception and managing your own feelings and your own understanding of what's going on. So I'll share these links again at the end of the chat, so you can follow up. So for me, I broke it down into these 4 kind of areas of focus to try to like manage a situation. So I completely agree with Sruthi and Manas is saying, like figuring out your institution, figuring out not just your department, but like what are the other funding, what's the other opportunities that are available, even outside of your institution, like what's in your field, which are the sort of shared groups that can support you. There's a whole lot of work to be done in trying to navigate what these are. So I think don't just think, oh, I'm in this one sector, there's one field, there's one discipline. That's the nice thing about PhD is that actually you can sort of, well, most of the time you're encouraged to be a bit more transdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary and see where the overlaps with other groups and other institutes are. So I think it's the question about navigating not only the opportunities and the ideas and the concepts in your own department, in your own faculty, but also within your field. And then also just learning what a PhD is. I think that's a huge part of it. And I say this just to like articulate things that I wish people had kind of said to me in the beginning. It took me almost a year to just learn, oh, this is what a PhD is. This is kind of what the idea of a contribution on a doctoral level. So I think don't feel bad if you don't know these things. It takes a while. And for me, it took a long, long time because I started the PhD during the lockdown. So I think these are kind of 3 areas just to identify. Then, of course, trying to manage yourself, figuring out what works for you and what are your routines. So, you know, some people work late at night, some people work in the morning. Understanding that routine becomes, I think, a very important part. Many of us have families, whether they are our families directly or we have caring responsibilities. I think it's really important to just acknowledge that, like, you're just not going to be working 24, well, maybe your supervisors think something else, but you're not going to be working 24/7. You really have to figure out what are your rhythms, how do you set up your own routines? How do you create targets that are manageable and not like write entire thesis by this date? You know, you have to often break it down to be like chapter 1, chapter 2, and even then it's like draft 1, draft 2, figuring out your own way of setting targets and stuff. I think these are like really important things that help just manage how you feel about yourself, because a huge part that I found is, and I'm sure Sruthi and Manas will agree, is this like constant self-doubt and this constant fear that you don't know something or that someone else is doing it better than you or someone else has got it figured out. And, you know, so I think figuring out what your own situation is, like, that's a huge part of the work. And I say, yeah, start early. There's no like, oh, when I get there. I think figure it out from day one. You know, even when you do your applications for funding, and I'm sure many of you are not there, are already in the program, but start. Trying to find your own way of being. So this is from a comic. This is my little bear sitting, looking at the stars in the middle of his journey. I think this is really important, is, you know, don't compare yourself to other people. Like, everyone's going through their own, I mean, you sound like very philosophical, but really, like, everyone's PhD is so different. Everyone else's situation is so different. It's a multi-year process. Things change from each month to each, you know, week to each year. But I think it is important to, like, find your own community, even if it's just 3 or 4 people that you can just drop a funny meme at 2 in the morning, or call for a coffee, or go for a chai, or anything that just lets you know that there's somebody out there who's, like, going through something similar. I think, and there's so many of us out there, and Twitter is another really great place to find community, funnily enough. I think it's important to try to find that and try to figure out where your community is. And they don't even have to be in your field. They could just be other people doing PhD. I think that's a huge part, to find your own way of being. And then also, what I keep telling myself, what people keep telling me, is that the PhD is not this magna opus. It's not your ultimate. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, the PhD is one part of your journey, and it's okay, cool. So this is going to do this, and I really like what Manas was saying about thinking about your career afterwards. Is like, the PhD doesn't have to be the end of your career. You can think of how it sort of guides you into the next piece. And then, yeah, this is for me the biggest thing, is just trying to figure out how to not be overwhelmed. And one of the scary fears that I had the whole time is, I need to read everything and be able to find it later. And like, I didn't want to read something in my first year and then not be able to find it in my third year and the night before when you're handing in a draft or something. So I think this question of trying to figure out, how do you manage your milestones? How do you manage your data collection? And how do you manage your sources? I mean, I'm sure many of us at this very moment have 100 tabs open on the top of our screen, and that stuff is not good. It's like, it really doesn't sit well for anyone, especially I definitely found that. So I'm just quickly talk about one very important tool that I've used that's just made my management of being overwhelmed a bit more manageable. So I'll just talk about that quickly. So I use this tool called Notion, and it's not, I'm not selling it. I don't get paid by them, I promise. But like Google Docs, Evernote, Obsidian, OneNote, they're all the same thing effectively. But I just found Notion like a game changer. It really just helped me a lot. And I'll share the slide with you afterwards, because I've got a little presentation that I shared with my colleagues here at UCL. But effectively, it's just note-taking software, but it also lets you organize all these things, lets you collaborate with people in a really cool way. It works on your phone. It makes like sort of to-dos and lists, and I make all of my topics of research on it. So you can see here, I organize my kind of whole life around Notion, and I got my PhD in there and my other parts of my life. And then I have all of my sort of, I make it, all my notes for my books are in there, all the reading groups, all my notes with different people, supervisors, my timelines, my kind of other tools. Again, I'll just drop this link on there. It's just a way to manage all the crazy different portals that you often have to work through. I also made like a shared resource for my PhD cohort, so we can also we use that to kind of share things. I manage a bunch of different projects in my PhD through it. Yeah, and I have a template if anyone's interested. I'm always, again, I'll just share all of these at the end of that. So it's just a really good tool, and it helps you think about not just organizing your PhD notes, but on your folder structures for your filing system on your computer and so on. So again, I'll share this link for all of that. And yeah, I think that's really it. I'm happy to talk a little bit more in the discussion. I got a final kind of exit slide. But yeah, I just find software has really helped me a lot with managing, not being overwhelmed. So getting quickly onto something like Zotero or Mendeley or OneNote. Again, I have a presentation for that. And yeah, just think of it as a journey, and it's not really a product, it's more of a process. And I wish everyone, you know, good luck and good sailings on this journey. Thanks.
Hi, thanks. I think while you've heard everyone speak about their research journey, I actually wanted to talk a little bit about how doing a PhD itself is sort of a political process, requires a bit of it's political in nature in some senses. And there is always some kind of a resistance or questions that you always encounter that require you to take stands at times. By the way, I'm Ekta. I don't want to introduce too much about myself. I guess that you've already read our profiles, but my research is in the area of literacy. And I want to talk specifically about the COVID period, where a lot of these dilemmas came in. And I was in the third year of my PhD when COVID hit, and it changed a lot of things for me. I was in the data collection stage. I was about to collect data, and it required me to rethink a lot of the things. And after a lot of frustration, anger, and sadness, there was a period of stillness and introspection that came in, which made me ask three important questions, which is, what is the purpose of my work? How can I make it meaningful for people in my neighborhood and community, especially about the kind of suffering and other things that one was noticing in social media, or what other people were going through, where I was very privileged, I felt, in that situation, who was able to do research and had resources to do so. So I felt myself in a very privileged position. And so also I thought that while I wanted to do connect my research in that moment to helping or being it meaningful in that moment for people around, I really did not know or did not have the skills actually to do that. So my first question in terms of what is the purpose of my work made me think about the stakeholders I was really working with. And my research is in the area of figurative multimodal literacies for adolescent children. And before the pandemic, my research was really academic, came out of academic interest, and also my work within education sector for the last 8-9 years. And the mode was really to understand what literacy is meant for different kinds of childhoods. But it was merely from the point of academic interest. And it was most of my research methods were in the positivist kind of domain, and inspired within or embedded within the psychology literature. And the pandemic made me more vigilant about children's lives. I started observing my own children in my own locality. Some of them were really happy not going to school as well. While at the same time, I saw children, writings about children from different kind of socioeconomic background who were suffering because they had to do a lot of house chores, especially girls. And they were, it was affecting their health as well as social emotional being. So there were different kinds of things that were happening in different areas that one could observe in the surrounding, but the discourse was talking about something else. And then one also saw increase in child marriages as it was reported. So there was this contrasting set of worldviews that one was presented within this pandemic. And as a researcher, one really had to rethink what one was doing within this. I also saw that a lot of the writing that was written about children was from an adult point of view. And I thought that I really need to understand what children were going through and what is children's perspective through all of this. So in my observation, I saw that it was important for me then to explore the experiences of children within my neighborhood, and also to connect with people who were probably thinking about similar things and trying to do research or connect research in terms of the meaningful day-to-day life of children. And so what I started doing is I started using LinkedIn, Twitter, all of these things to just connect with people in the same area, as well as just have informal conversations with them that what is it that we can really do. And within this, I remember there was IT for Change is an organization in Bangalore. And what they started is a National Coalition of Emergency Education, where a lot of the civil society organizations came together and they actually started discussing state by state what is happening within education, what are the government's efforts toward it, as well as the lacuna within it. And this really inspired some of the students who were around there who were also doing research. We came up with this idea of learning centers around it. So the idea was that within your own building or space, can you make a space for children in your neighborhood where who could come, and they could come with their own reading, learning material, or you could offer them some, but let them decide what they want to do with that time. So you could offer an hour of your time and let them decide what they wanted to do. And this became a very interesting space that we cultivated during COVID, where children were taking the lead and telling us what, sometimes children would come and they would tell us, help us with our homework. We started with textbooks, we moved to arts, we moved to some other thing. but it was all children's initiations. And this also became a space where I experimented with a lot of my research design, as well as the research tools with some of these children. And so that became a space of experimentation, of exploration for the children, as well as for us as researchers. At the same time, we started a childhood reading group within the South Asian region. And what were different kinds, what is the connection, the historical links of the idea of the child to that of different South Asian regions? What are they, how are their histories connected with ours? And many of the discussants in these groups were themselves doing research, but they were also involved in several practical implementation of their research. So it opened up a host of variety of ways of doing research within, and also I felt the research for me moved beyond the university confines into the civil society concerns and groups. And for me, it opened up a multiple ways of doing research guided by social concerns. And I personally feel that while I was experimenting with these different things, I did not receive the kind of support that I was expecting within my university. And it made me reflect that Indian universities especially, and this is in conversation with different students, these efforts were not appreciated. And also university in India requires you to follow a certain structure. At the same time, it expects you to follow that structure in a very hierarchical pattern. And there is definitely a sense, as in school education, there is a very clearly colonial roots of where these structures, how these structures are created, what is the kind of language, and all of these are connected. And I also felt that Indian students, especially, there is also a level of infantilization of students that even happens at the level of university, where your agency as an adult is really denied. And this goes in terms of choosing a supervisor, your doctoral advisory committee, your research tool or site. All of these are thought of as something that you cannot do on your own, and you don't have a voice, and sometimes these are just imposed on you. So it quickly became clear that the sooner one realizes about these kinds of different issues and also develops a way to resist some of these. Because I think one can complain about them as much as one wants, but at the end of the day, it's your PhD. What do you want to do with it? And one has to develop ways of resisting this. And one way I think for me that worked is to develop friendships with students who were resisting within my own university and outside. Also develop sort of a tribe where I could voice some of my ideas and also understand how I can meander through this politics of doing research itself. So the skills, the meaningful skills that I was hoping to develop outside the university. And at the same time, I think for me, it became important that they need to be open and be spoken about. So for example, we started engaging in public writings of what this means. Several of these were published in magazines and other areas. And I felt like it had to be beyond English and other languages. And I've been experimenting of writing research in Indian languages as well. So Hindi was one. And I also discovered my Hindi writing and research is not that great. So I started using cultural resources that are available for me, like my own family members who know their language better than me. And so research and the skills that one needs, in order to communicate with the community, I think there were different kind of relationships that one was building with people around them while doing research as well. And there was a very interesting exchange that happened with family members and others, what research means, which I think became sort of a communication of research that one develops with people around. And I also thought that research should not be just confined to the university. And so there's an idea that developed among us that, okay, your research should be communicated to the public. And one of the ways I was able to get consent from my own stakeholders was that we put up a public exhibition of the findings of the research after it's done. And also display some of the artifacts that children have made. To also talk about literacy in a much more larger perspective than is available to the community, so that it benefits the community in some way and some sort of a discussion takes place. So I just want to end with 3 important lessons that I have learned through some of these engagements, is that being present and aware of the day-to-day micro as well as the macro changes around us, and letting yourself ask socially meaningful questions, which sometimes we don't have answers, but I think once you keep engaging with those questions, you also look for answers, around you or through people, and research becomes a dynamic process. Also, learning can and should take place in several spheres, as all the other speakers have spoken before me. And build your own voice as a researcher. Continue to build a circle of acquaintances and trusted people where you can sort of sound off your ideas for this purpose. So that's all. Thanks.